You know, it's pretty rare for a person's name to become a common word in our language. But one name stands out, not for some great invention or discovery, but for a really dark human impulse: Sade. Today, we're going way beyond the word to uncover the truly shocking life of the man himself, the Marquis de Sade.
We all know this word, right? Sadism. It sounds so clinical, almost sterile, for such a deeply unsettling idea. But the story of the man it's named after is anything but simple. I mean, it is a wild tale of extreme privilege, horrifying crimes, decades behind bars, and a philosophy so radical it still has the power to shock us today.
So that's the big question here. Who really was Donatier Alphonse François, the Marquis de Sade? Was he just a monster, a revolutionary thinker, a philosopher, or something else entirely? To figure it out, we have to go back, way back, to the final decadent days of France's old regime.
So here's our roadmap. We'll start with his beginnings as a privileged rebel. Then we'll dive into the catalog of crimes that made him infamous. After that, we'll see how he became a philosopher behind bars. And finally, we'll explore the Marquis' incredibly surprising and controversial legacy.
All right, our story kicks off in a world of just unimaginable wealth and luxury. Sade was born into the absolute highest ranks of French society, and his life, right from the very beginning, was defined by a rebellion against the exact world that gave him everything.
And the irony of his family tree is just incredible. The Sade family name was already famous thanks to Laure de Sade. She was the muse for Petrarch's love sonnets, like the ultimate symbol of pure, courtly love. Then centuries later, that very same name would come to mean its most brutal and twisted opposite.
His childhood was basically a recipe for rebellion. He's born in a palace, but his mother pretty much just abandons him to join a convent. Then, at just 4 years old, he gets into a fight with a prince and gets himself exiled from court. So he's sent to live with his uncle, an abbé who was, let's just say, known more for his wild parties than his piety. Think about it. Every authority figure in his life was either absent, a hypocrite, or totally indulgent. It created this sense of entitlement that was bound to have some dire consequences.
So as Sade gets older, that rebellious streak just hardens into outright criminal behavior. His private parties and debauchery started spilling out into public scandals that made him one of the most infamous men in all of France.
Just look at this timeline. You can see how things just get worse and worse. It kicks off in 1763 with an assault. By 1768, the Rose Keller scandal makes headlines. He literally tortured a beggar. Then, in 1772, things escalate dramatically. He's sentenced to death for poisoning prostitutes. And just 2 years after that, he's accused of kidnapping kids for his castle. This wasn't just a few bad choices. This was a clear, escalating pattern of shocking violence.
So how do you stop a guy like this? Well, in 18th century France, you used something called a lettre de cachet. It was basically a royal warrant that let you lock someone up indefinitely. No trial, no questions asked. And his biggest enemy, his own mother-in-law, Madame de Montreuil, used her connections to get one. She was dead set on burying him in a prison to protect her family's reputation. And you know what? It worked. This single piece of paper is what kept Sade locked away for most of his adult life.
Okay, but this is where the story takes a really fascinating turn. Being physically locked up didn't crush Sade. It actually transformed him. Since he couldn't act on his impulses anymore, he turned inward. He started building a whole philosophical universe on paper that was somehow even more extreme than any of his real-life crimes.
Life in the Bastille absolutely wrecked him physically. He got seriously overweight, his health was failing, his eyesight was going. But psychologically, something else was happening. The source material calls it a mania for freedom. This obsessive, almost compulsive need to write down every dark thought, every fantasy, every philosophical argument for his worldview. Writing became his only escape, his only freedom.
40 feet. Just think about that number for a second. What on earth could possibly be 40 feet long? And this just brilliantly captures his obsession. It was the length of a scroll he secretly made by pasting tiny sheets of paper together. On this tiny 40-foot-long ribbon, he wrote his most infamous book, The 120 Days of Sodom, in teeny tiny script so the guards wouldn't find it. He actually thought it was lost forever when he was transferred just days before the storming of the Bastille, a loss that he said made him weep tears of blood.
So when the French Revolution erupts and those lettres de cachet are abolished, Sade is suddenly a free man. And in one of history's greatest ironies, this aristocrat completely reinvents himself as Citizen Sade. He joins a radical political club,
He writes revolutionary pamphlets. He even gives the eulogy for the murdered radical hero Mara. But here's the craziest part. He argued against the death penalty, saying the state had no right to kill. And that moderate stance during the Reign of Terror, of all things, got him arrested again. He barely escaped the guillotine himself, all thanks to a bureaucratic fluke.
So what was this philosophy he cooked up in prison? Well, he essentially took the popular ideas of the Enlightenment and twisted them into a dark mirror image. While thinkers like Rousseau were talking about nature as the source of goodness and harmony, Sade saw nature as a totally amoral, relentless force of creation and destruction. For him, something like murder wasn't a sin against God or humanity, it was just a reconfiguration of atoms, just nature doing its thing. It's a terrifyingly logical worldview if you think about it.
Sade's story doesn't just end when he dies in 1814, oh no. Instead, his ideas go on this strange new journey, transforming from the ravings of a madman locked in an asylum into a serious subject for psychologists, artists, and philosophers. The first step was making it clinical. In 1886, a psychiatrist named Richard von Krafft-Ebing was putting together his famous book, Psychopathia Sexualis, and when he needed a word for getting pleasure from inflicting pain, he reached for the name of the most famous example he could think of, the Marquis de Sade. And just like that, sadism was born. His name was now officially and permanently part of the language of science.
But then, in the early 20th century, people started to see him differently. The poet Apollinaire dug up Sade's forbidden writings and championed him, not as some pervert, but as a hero of liberation. He called him the freest spirit that has yet existed. I mean, that quote completely changes the conversation, doesn't it?
And the Surrealists absolutely ran with this idea. To them, Sade was a prophet. They believed he had dared to explore the darkest corners of the human unconscious long before Freud ever did. Artists like André Breton and Man Ray saw him as the ultimate rebel, and they used his shocking books as a weapon to attack what they saw as the hypocrisy of polite society.
And the debate kept going. In 1951, the feminist philosopher Simone de Beauvoir made this incredibly provocative argument. She actually called Sade a great moralist. Her reasoning? Because he refused to be a hypocrite. He took his darkest desires to their logical, horrifying conclusions. And in doing that, he forces us all to confront some really uncomfortable truths about power, freedom, and desire itself.
So, we circle all the way back to our original question. What do we make of the Marquis de Sade? Was he a depraved monster whose name is rightly a synonym for cruelty? Was he a radical philosopher who exposed the dark side of human freedom? Or a revolutionary who just embodied the violent chaos of his era? The truth is, he was probably all of the above. And the very fact that he refuses to fit into any easy category, well, that's exactly why we're still talking about him centuries later.